What if the person you trusted most wasn't the one holding your hand, but the one quietly holding your downfall? It is a subtle question, perhaps even uncomfortable, but stories worth telling rarely begin in comfort. Tonight, I am going to tell you about Caleb Rowe, a man of silence, precision, and a kind of patience most people mistake for peace. Caleb served in the shadows for years as a recon operative. He returned home expecting quiet, but sometimes the silence means something is already broken. This is not a story about rage. It is not even about betrayal in the usual sense. It is about what happens when someone betrays a man who was trained not to react, but to observe, and then act with terrifying clarity. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Which city, which corner of the world? Drop it in the comments, because no matter where you are, the question remains the same. If you knew you were being lied to, how far would you go to find the truth? This is not just revenge. It is control. It is clarity. It is Caleb Rowe. Let's begin. The clouds over Seattle hung low, pressing against the city like a warning. Caleb Rowe stepped off the plane with a duffel over his shoulder and eyes that had seen too much. After 8 months on a covert assignment overseas, most men would look for comfort. Caleb didn't. He scanned the airport with quiet precision, his senses tuned to tension the way most people tune into music. His body was home, but his instincts were still deployed. Sabrina hadn't texted in 2 days. Not unusual on the surface. Just busy, she'd said. But Caleb didn't live on the surface. He lived in layers. Their son Leo had missed their last scheduled video call too, and when he asked, Sabrina said he had a fever. But Caleb remembered the last time she used that excuse. The timing had been too neat. As the Uber pulled into their neighborhood, Rainier, ridge, tidy lawns and porch lights, Caleb stared out the window. Their home looked untouched. The mailbox was neatly stacked, the garden trimmed, the kind of perfection you only maintain when you're trying to hide something. He stepped out of the car and paused. The front door opened before he knocked. Sabrina stood there, hair pinned up, robe cinched just tightly enough to suggest she wasn't expecting him. Or maybe she was expecting someone else. Her expression flickered for half a second before softening into a smile. "You're early," she said, voice light, casual. Caleb tilted his head. "I'm exactly on time." She hesitated. "Right. I just didn't hear from you this morning." There had been no morning message. That was true. Because Caleb wanted to arrive without fanfare, wanted to see things as they were, not as they might be made to appear. He hugged her, her arms wrapped around him, but there was a hollowness to it, like muscle memory rather than emotion. She smelled faintly of something new, a cologne he didn't recognize. Leo came running seconds later, breaking the tension with a child's innocence. "Dad." Caleb knelt and scooped him into his arms, holding on just a bit longer than necessary. The boy clung back, genuine, warm, unguarded. At least one person in this house was still real. Inside the house was spotless, too spotless. The faint scent of expensive whiskey lingered in the kitchen, the kind Caleb never drank, and Sabrina claimed to hate. On the living room table sat a coaster that hadn't been there before, glass rings in its center. They had dinner, roast chicken, too perfectly timed, and Sabrina laughed too often at things that weren't funny. She touched her phone more than she touched Caleb. Later that night in bed, she turned her back to him. She used to curl into his chest. Now she clutched her pillow like it offered better safety. At exactly 2:13 a.m., her phone buzzed. She didn't move, but Caleb did. Slowly, quietly. He didn't need answers yet. He only needed confirmation that the war he thought he left behind had followed him home. Morning came with a stillness that felt unnatural. Sabrina was already in the kitchen by the time Caleb came downstairs, dressed in a pale blue sweater he didn't recognize. She greeted him with a bright smile and slid a cup of coffee across the table. "Thought you'd want your usual," she said, as if routines could erase distance. Caleb nodded, took the cup, and watched. Her movements were fluid, almost too polished, like someone performing normal. She reached for her phone again and tilted it away from him just slightly. Subtle, but not subtle enough. "I was thinking," she continued, "maybe we could do a family dinner tonight. Just us. Reconnect." He sipped the coffee and said nothing. Sabrina always planned dinners when she was nervous, when she needed to stage closeness. The last time had been after Caleb caught her deleting old messages. Nothing incriminating, just enough to raise questions. She'd smoothed it over with candlelight and conversation, and for a time, he'd let himself believe her explanations. But this time, something felt different. The house had changed. It wasn't just the faint cologne that lingered too long in the hallway, or the misplaced whiskey bottle that had vanished by morning. It was the silence in the corners. The rearranged photo frames. The drawer in Caleb's study that had once been locked now left ajar. Little things. The kind of changes people don't notice when they don't expect to be noticed. At noon, Sabrina left to run errands. She offered a kiss before she went, but it barely brushed his cheek. Caleb watched her drive away without looking back. Once the car turned the corner, he walked to the garage. Her side of it was too clean. The trunk of her car had always held reusable grocery bags, Leo's soccer cleats, a folded stroller they hadn't used in years. Now it was empty. He sat back down in the living room and scrolled through the home's Wi-Fi logs on his phone. A new device had connected 3 days ago. Unfamiliar. Android. Caleb's mind logged the timestamp. He checked the security camera app, one he'd installed before his deployment, hidden deep within the server settings, never shown on the main screen. The front camera feed had a 36-hour gap. He knew what that meant. Someone had disabled it, and someone had reactivated it just before he returned. Later that day, he took Leo to the park. The boy chattered about school and friends while Caleb nodded, his eyes never still. He scanned the sidewalks, the parked cars, watching, calculating, his mind already assembling a map of truths unspoken. That evening, Sabrina returned late. Her hair was damp from a shower at Maddie's. She smelled different again. A floral scent. New, sharp. Caleb didn't confront her. Not yet. That wasn't his way. Instead, he kissed Leo goodnight, turned off the lights, and returned to the shadows. There are moments in a man's life where silence becomes strategy. Caleb Rowe had just entered his. The following morning, the air in the house felt thicker, like it was holding its breath. Caleb moved through the kitchen in silence, noting the fresh bouquet of white lilies on the counter. Sabrina didn't like lilies. She said they reminded her of funerals. But there they were, arranged with care in a vase Caleb had never seen. She was already gone, a sticky note left behind in her delicate handwriting. Errands again. Don't wait up. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. Caleb didn't eat. He sat at the table, letting the silence speak louder than sound. Then his phone buzzed. One message. No name, just a number he hadn't seen in years. Need to talk. Alone. You won't like it. Caleb stared at the screen. Gabe Morales. They'd served together in a 3-man recon unit overseas. No one had a better instinct for threat than Gabe, and the man never reached out unless it was serious. They met at a small, nearly empty cafe near the docks. Neutral ground, away from the neighborhood's eyes. Gabe looked older than Caleb, remembered. Beard heavier, eyes more tired. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, Gabe began, gripping a black coffee like it was an anchor. But then I heard you were back. Figured you should know. Know what? Caleb's voice was calm, flat. Gabe hesitated, then leaned forward. I saw Sabrina last month, downtown. She didn't see me. She was with someone. Caleb said nothing. Gabe kept going. It wasn't just lunch, they were close. Real close. The guy, I recognized him. Voss. Remember him? Of course he did. Jared Voss was the kind of man who left a trail of noise everywhere he went. Self-made, crypto investor, social media darling, all charm and borrowed confidence. He'd once tried to recruit Caleb into a speculative security startup before Caleb left for his last deployment. Sabrina had always dismissed Jared as arrogant and overcompensating. Apparently she'd changed her mind. Gabe lowered his voice. They were at the Skyview residences. Penthouse floor, a private building, no hotels, no open lobbies, places for people who didn't want to be seen. I didn't take photos, Gabe added. Didn't feel right. But I knew you'd want the truth. Caleb nodded slowly, eyes locked on the table. Thank you, he said. Gabe leaned back. You okay? Caleb gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not here to react, I'm here to understand. That night back home, Sabrina acted like nothing was wrong. She laughed too easily, poured wine without asking, touched his hand like she still had the right. But Caleb already knew. She wasn't coming clean. She was doubling down, and he wouldn't force her hand, not yet. Because every liar thinks they're in control, until someone like Caleb starts watching. He lay awake in the dark, not asking questions, not seeking comfort, only listening. And just before dawn, a whisper of a plan began to take shape. The next morning, Caleb Rowe woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet. Sabrina still lay curled under the duvet, one hand tucked beneath her pillow, breathing even and slow. For a moment, he stood by the bedroom door, watching her. She looked peaceful, innocent even. But Caleb had spent enough time behind enemy lines to know better. The most dangerous people are always the ones who appear harmless. He moved with, practiced silence through the house. By 6 a.m., he was in the garage, standing over an old lockbox he'd kept sealed for years. Inside were tools he hadn't touched since his last deep surveillance mission: a portable signal interceptor, a GPS, duplicator, a slim tracking module disguised as a power bank, and a micro camera designed to embed behind mirrors or vents. Caleb wasn't improvising. He was reverting. He didn't want revenge. Not yet. What he needed was evidence, patterns, proof that his instincts weren't just memory playing tricks. And most of all, he needed to see her lies, unedited, unfiltered, uninterrupted. By noon, Sabrina had left again. Another lunch with Maddie. Caleb waited exactly 20 minutes before opening the bathroom vanity. Taped to the underside of the cabinet was a black lipstick tube. Not hers, not any brand she used. Inside it, tucked carefully, was a slim keycard, white, minimalist. Skyview Residences printed faintly on the side. That was her first mistake. He installed the camera that afternoon, in the hallway near the front door, disguised within a vent. Motion triggered. High resolution. Connected to a private relay he'd built years ago for off-grid surveillance. It would send encrypted snapshots to a clean burner phone each time someone entered the house. He placed another tracker inside the lining of her car's trunk, beneath the spare tire, undetectable without removing the entire housing. By the time she returned at dusk, laughing into her phone before quickly ending the call, Caleb was already 10 steps ahead. Dinner plans tonight? She asked, setting her keys down. Thought we were staying in, Caleb replied evenly, flipping a page of the book in his lap. She smiled. Right, just checking. The next few days played out like a quiet performance. Sabrina shifted between flirtation and guilt, overcorrecting with affection, over-explaining her absences. Caleb never pushed, never accused. He simply watched. The tracker showed her visiting the same location 3 times. Skyview Residences, Penthouse B. Each time she stayed precisely 1 hour and 45 minutes. Each visit occurred between 12:30 and 2:15 p.m., always after claiming to be at yoga, at Maddie's, or running errands. On Friday, he followed. He stayed 3 cars behind, used mirrored sunglasses, drove his old utility sedan, untraceable, unremarkable. When she pulled into the underground garage, he didn't enter. He knew better. Instead, he parked half a block away and slipped into a nearby cafe with a rooftop view. From the upper terrace, binoculars in hand, he watched her step out of her car in heels and a silk blouse she never wore for him. She keyed into the elevator, took it to the top floor. By the time Caleb got back home, the house was still as he'd left it. Leo was with a neighbor spending the afternoon on a planned playdate. Sabrina walked in 20 minutes later, holding an iced coffee and humming. Like nothing had happened. She kissed his cheek. "I missed you today." Caleb nodded. "I know." He didn't say a word about the camera feed already waiting in his inbox, showing her stepping into Jared Voss's penthouse like it was routine. Because it was. And now Caleb had the first hard truth. Lies don't hide in the dark, they hide in routine. And he had just started recording. The footage came through in fragments that night. Clear, precise, time-stamped. Sabrina entering the penthouse. Jared Voss, shirt slightly unbuttoned, meeting. Her at the door with a smile too familiar. The hug lingered. The kiss wasn't casual. It was practiced, repeated. Caleb watched it in silence from his office, the room dark, except for the soft glow of the monitor. Each frame cut deeper than the last, not because he was surprised, but because it was finally undeniable. There was no more gray, no more room for doubt. The man in the video, Jared, moved like he belonged there. Hand on her waist, brushing hair from her cheek, pouring her a drink like he had done it a dozen times before. Maybe more. Sabrina laughed at something he said, and the sound made Caleb's jaw tighten. It was the same laugh she used at their dinner table, the one she gave Leo when he made a joke about dinosaurs. He paused the video on her smile. There was no guilt in it, just comfort. Later that night, Sabrina came into Caleb's office. She leaned on the door frame, wine in hand, wearing his old hoodie like a souvenir of who she used to be. "You okay?" she asked. Caleb looked up, calm, as ever. "Just reviewing a project. Work stuff." He nodded once. "Always." She smiled, stepping in, placing the wine down beside his keyboard. "Don't stay up too late." Caleb watched her leave the room, her bare feet soundless on the wood floor. She didn't know he had seen everything, that he had already mirrored her phone to a hidden app on a device inside his locked cabinet. Every message, every call log, every photo. He picked up the wine glass she left behind, lipstick on the rim, not her usual shade. He smelled it briefly, something floral, not hers, probably a remnant from Jared's apartment, a kiss exchanged too quickly, too carelessly before. She cleaned herself up for home. He set the glass down and opened the app. A new text had come in just minutes ago. Jared Voss. "Still thinking about this afternoon, you smelled like vanilla again. My favorite." Caleb didn't react. He just marked the message, copied it, and saved it to a hidden folder named Proof. He wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Confrontation was about emotion. Caleb wasn't here for emotion anymore. He was here for information. In the morning, Sabrina acted like nothing had changed. She wore soft sweaters, made pancakes for Leo, laughed as if the world were still whole. But Caleb watched the rhythm of her days with a sniper's calm. Every movement, every word, every lie disguised as routine, and when she kissed him goodbye that afternoon, he kissed her back. Because pretending was her game. Now, it was his too. And this time, the man being lied to wasn't confused. He was building a case, piece by perfect piece. Over the next week, Caleb Rowe became a master of stillness. Every gesture he made, every question he didn't ask, every smile he returned, it was all performance. Sabrina floated through the house in practiced ease, wearing guilt like perfume. Invisible to the untrained but unmistakable once you knew what to smell for. He never flinched when she reached for her phone and turned it just out of view. Didn't ask why she had suddenly taken an interest in fitness classes she never attended, or why she returned with tousled hair and the scent of unfamiliar cologne. He let it unfold, carefully, quietly. He mirrored her calendar app, then cross-checked it with real-world surveillance. He noticed the pattern. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, she claimed to be at a local Pilates studio. Caleb called the studio. She hadn't checked in once. She had never even registered for a class. That same day, he activated a second, tracking tool, one designed not just to log location, but ambient audio through her smartwatch. The first file arrived that night. Sabrina's voice soft and low. "I can't stay long today. Leo's with Caleb and I don't want to risk anything." Jared's reply was almost lazy. "He's never going to find out. Guys like him don't ask questions. They just fade out." Caleb saved the file, time-stamped it, and backed it up in 3 separate drives. At home, he kept the rhythm unchanged. He played board games with Leo, helped with math homework, grilled dinner while Sabrina scrolled through her phone and responded to messages she thought were private. He let her wear his hoodie again. Let her call him love. Let her lean into the safety of his silence. But every move she made was now mapped. The more predictable she became, the less effort he had to use to predict her. He began planting false seeds. One night while cleaning the kitchen, he left an old receipt on the counter, an invoice for a private investigator, half visible beneath a stack of takeout menus. He watched her notice it the next morning. She stared at it for 2 seconds too long, then walked past it like it didn't matter. But later that evening, her text to Jared was clipped. "Sabrina, we need to lay low for a few days. I think Caleb might suspect something." Jared, "He's bluffing, trust me." Caleb smiled. He wasn't bluffing. He was baiting. The following day, he wiped the receipt from the counter. Nothing was ever said about it, but her behavior shifted. She stopped leaving her phone unattended. She double-locked the bedroom door when she showered. She changed her passwords. It didn't matter. He already had access to everything. By the end of the week, he had mapped out her entire digital life, every login, every email, every deleted message. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was exposed, and she didn't even know it. He added Jared's name to a long dossier of information he was building. Financial records, social media history, corporate affiliations. Caleb wasn't just planning revenge. He was drafting a full character assassination, and yet at dinner, he sat beside Sabrina as if nothing had changed. He passed her the salt. He complimented her lasagna. When she laughed, he smiled. And when she leaned in to kiss his cheek, he let her. Because this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about control. And Caleb Rowe now controlled everything. The day Caleb Rowe decided to trigger the trap, it began like any other. Quiet, gray, and clean. Seattle rain traced lines down the windows while Sabrina moved through the kitchen with the same grace she always used when she was hiding something. She poured coffee, hummed faintly, kissed Leo on the forehead. Caleb watched it all like a stage, play he'd already seen a dozen times, but this time he held the script. He'd prepared for this moment over weeks. Every movement calibrated, every response rehearsed. He had mirrored her phone, logged her location data, archived Jared's messages and voice notes. But this wasn't just about collecting proof anymore. This was about letting her believe she was still in control. At 10:03 a.m., Sabrina left the house claiming to meet Maddie for brunch. Caleb waited 10 minutes, then checked the live tracker. Her car moved west, wrong direction entirely. As predicted, she wasn't headed for eggs and coffee. She was headed for Jared. He slipped into his truck, but he wasn't following. Not yet. He had something better. From his phone, he accessed the rooftop camera he'd planted across from the Skyview residences 2 nights earlier. A crowd-funded art gallery shared the rooftop space. Caleb had posed as a donor and offered to install extra security coverage to protect their sculpture display. The lens faced directly into Jared's penthouse windows. Discreet, motion-triggered, streaming live. Caleb watched as Sabrina entered the building. Elevator timestamp matched her phone log to the second. 15 minutes later, Jared appeared, at the window, shirtless, drink in hand. She joined him, laughing. He zoomed in. Evidence was one thing, humiliation was another. But Caleb wasn't looking to humiliate. He was building psychological leverage. Trust, once broken, leaves a vacuum. And fear fills that space faster than guilt ever will. At 11:34 a.m., he triggered the first warning. An anonymous message sent to Jared's phone. Unknown. You took something that wasn't yours. Caleb watched through the camera as Jared paused, staring at his phone. He showed it to Sabrina. She waved it off, shrugged. But Caleb noticed something small, the way she tightened her robe at the collar. Subconscious. Nervous. 5 minutes later, another message. Unknown. Enjoy your afternoon. It might be your last one. This time, Jared stood up, walked toward the window, looked around, clearly unsettled. By noon, Caleb had planted enough doubt. He returned home before Sabrina and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, pretending to scroll through. Property listings. Sabrina walked in 15 minutes later, cheeks flushed, hair slightly out of place. You're back early, he said without looking up. She blinked. Brunch was quick. Maddie says hi? A pause. Too short to catch for most, but not for him. Yeah, she's great. Caleb nodded, closed his laptop. That night, while she showered, he set the final step in motion. From a secure line, he uploaded a public data leak under an alias, The Loyal Eye. It included snapshots of Jared's questionable investment portfolios, flagged tax filings, and encrypted screenshots of private chats between him and other clients, some of which revealed unethical activity bordering on fraud. Then, the finishing touch, a link sent to several finance forums, influencers, and a well-known tech journalist. By morning, it was trending. CryptoCon. Jared Voss scam. Within 12 hours, Jared's name was radioactive, and Sabrina had no idea she had just crawled into a sinking ship because Caleb wasn't planning to confront her. He was planning to let the world do it, for him. The first wave hit just before noon. Jared Voss's name appeared in a series of viral Reddit threads under the headline, Crypto Star or Con Artist, Inside the Empire of Jared Voss. The expose was built from the very files Caleb had leaked, carefully timed and perfectly curated. It began with questionable investor returns, shifted into allegations of insider trading, and climaxed with screenshots of Jared flirting with female clients, some married, some underage. The community lit up. Finance YouTube channels picked it up within hours. TikTok influencers followed. Caleb watched it all unfold from his laptop, seated calmly at the kitchen counter while Sabrina bustled in and out of the room. She was distracted. Her phone vibrated constantly, but she never checked it in front of him. The tension around her mouth said enough. She knew something was happening, but not from where. And certainly not from whom. At 2:41 p.m., Jared called her. Caleb had already routed her phone through his silent listening app. Jared's voice was sharp, rattled. Something's wrong, really wrong. Someone leaked everything. My investors are pulling out. There's an inquiry starting. The SEC is in my email. Sabrina whispering, Slow down, are you sure it's not just online nonsense? You've had trolls before. Jared, No, this is surgical, strategic. They had private messages, Bree, encrypted ones. Someone's inside. The name stopped. Caleb Cold Bree. He hadn't heard that name used since college. Short for Sabrina Bree Holloway, her maiden name. Jared didn't call her Sabrina. He called her by a name she hadn't used since before she was married. That was telling. Sabrina. Again? Okay, let me think. I can't talk long. Caleb's been quiet lately, too quiet. Jared. You think it's him? She paused. Then, I don't know, but I've never seen him this calm. It scares me. Caleb smiled. She wasn't wrong. Later that afternoon, Caleb set up a temporary email with an anonymous account and sent one file directly to Jared's largest investor, disguised as a tip from a former employee. Within minutes, Caleb saw the investor's firm publicly withdraw from a major partnership. By evening, Jared was trending for all the wrong reasons. Business sites, gossip blogs, even mainstream outlets picked up the scent. His crypto empire was being picked apart in real time. Headlines compared him to Elizabeth Holmes, Jordan Belfort, and every overconfident fraud in between. Sabrina checked her phone obsessively that night. Her hands shook once when she thought he wasn't looking. Caleb pretended to be immersed in the news, just not the news she was watching fall apart. "Long day?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He glanced up. "Just reading about this crypto guy. Jared something." She froze, just for a beat. "Oh? Yeah. Looks bad. Whole career falling apart overnight. Makes you wonder who's really watching. These people." She nodded faintly, then turned away. That night, Caleb lay awake while Sabrina slept beside him. Her breathing was uneven, too shallow for real sleep. He reached for his phone, opened the mirrored message thread. A new one had just come in. "Jared, I can't talk here anymore. I think he knows. Everything." Caleb copied it, archived it. Outside, rain beat against the windows like clockwork. Inside, a man who had once been betrayed now held every piece of the game in his hands, and tomorrow he would offer Sabrina her only way out. The truth was no longer a secret. It was a storm, and Caleb Rowe was the eye. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. Not the kind of cold you feel on your skin, but the kind that sits in the air when something irreversible is about to happen. Sabrina moved through the kitchen with rehearsed ease, pouring coffee, setting out toast, wearing a smile that looked like it was borrowed from a better day. Caleb watched her unmoving. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She finally broke the silence. "You're quiet today." "I've been thinking," he said calmly. "About us." She froze briefly, then forced a chuckle. "That sounds serious." "It is," Caleb replied, setting down his mug. "Sit down." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" He looked at her evenly. "Because I'm giving you a choice." She didn't move. But she didn't laugh either. Caleb pulled a small folder from beneath the counter and slid it across the table. Inside, screenshots, message logs, location data, photos, Jared's name, face time-stamped encounters. Her entire double life in one silent avalanche of truth. She opened it with trembling fingers. Said nothing. But her face changed. The kind of change that happens when someone realizes the story they've been living has already ended. Just not on their terms. "I'm not here to fight," Caleb said. "Not for you, and not for the past." She looked up, eyes wide with a panic she couldn't shape into words. "You're going to take that file," he continued, "and you're going to sign the divorce papers I'll send you tomorrow. No contest, no claim, no custody." "Leo," she started. "He stays. With me," Caleb said, his voice hardening only now. "You walk away from this house, from him, from everything." She blinked, frozen. "What's the alternative?" she whispered. Caleb leaned forward. "The alternative," he said softly, "is that I release every file I have. To your employer, your clients, your family, and to the press." Silence. "You think I'm bluffing?" he added almost kindly. Sabrina stared down at the folder, then at him, and for the first time she understood. This wasn't vengeance. It was consequence. "I'll sign," she whispered. Caleb stood, calm as ever. "You already have," he said. And just like that, the war she thought she was winning was over, not with a bang, but with surrender. Sabrina left the table without another word, but Caleb could see it in her shoulders, the tension, the calculation. She hadn't accepted defeat. She was regrouping, rewriting, planning her next move. And he let her, because he knew something she didn't. When people think they're cornered, they show you exactly where they'll run. By that evening, she was quieter than usual, her phone never out of reach. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. At 9:47 p.m., after Leo had gone to bed, she kissed Caleb on the cheek with a softness that didn't belong to her anymore and said, "I'm going to Maddie's. Just for a bit." He nodded. She left wearing makeup she hadn't worn in weeks, and a coat too light for the rain. Caleb waited 5 minutes, then tapped his screen. The tracker on her car lit up, blinking red across the city map. She wasn't headed to Maddie's. She was going back to Jared, but this time, he wasn't going to watch from afar. He got into his truck and followed the signal, quietly, patiently. No headlights. She pulled into the side lot of the same high-rise where her lies had lived so comfortably. Caleb parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, blending into shadows. Rain glossed the streets, muffling sound and sharpening the tension. Through a lobby window, he saw her. She was talking to Jared in the hallway, frantic. Jared looked pale, nervous. Both of them kept glancing around. She was trying to run, trying to take control, trying, even now, to outmaneuver the man she never truly saw. And that's when Caleb stepped out of the dark. He didn't raise his voice, didn't clench his fists. He just looked at Jared and said, "You really thought this was your story?" Jared froze. Sabrina gasped. Panic bloomed across her face. Caleb stepped forward, slow and precise. "You were never the plan," he said, to Jared. "You were the mirror I needed her to look into." Sabrina reached for his arm, desperate. "Caleb, please." He turned his gaze to her, calm, measured. "You already made your choice." And with that, the illusion shattered. There was no more escape, only the moment she finally realized she hadn't been outsmarting Caleb Rowe. She'd been walking into his design all along. Jared backed against the wall, shoulders tense, eyes darting for exits that didn't exist. The false confidence he wore like cologne had evaporated. All that remained was a man who had built his life on illusion, money without ethics, charm without conscience, and now stood in front of someone who saw through it all. "Look," Jared stammered, lifting his hands as if Caleb were holding a weapon. "I didn't know she was married. She told me it was over." Caleb tilted his head, almost amused. "You're not on trial for stealing my wife," he said flatly. "You're on trial for thinking you'd never be held accountable." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a USB drive, sleek, black, loaded with every ounce of evidence not yet made public. "This," Caleb said, holding it up between his fingers, "goes to the press tomorrow. Every investor, every regulator, every person you've conned." Jared swallowed hard. No, please, listen, we can work something out." Caleb stepped closer and Jared shrank in place. "Here's how this works," Caleb said calmly. "You're going to send your own confession. You're going to forward these files, admit to the fraud, and announce your resignation from every project you've ever touched. Not because I want revenge, but because I want the truth documented in your own words." Sabrina watched in silence, trembling. Caleb didn't even look at her. Jared's voice cracked. "And if I don't?" Caleb's eyes turned cold. "Then I let the world eat you alive, and I'll make sure it doesn't do it all at once." There was no bravado in his voice, no raised tone, just certainty, and that made it worse. Jared nodded shakily. "I'll do it." Caleb placed the USB into his palm like a final sentence. "You have 24 hours. Then he turned to Sabrina, who hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. "Go home," he said simply. She opened her mouth to argue, to explain, but his gaze silenced her. It was over. No shouting, no violence, just exposure, judgment, and silence. Caleb walked away without looking back, leaving Jared with the weight of his own undoing, and Sabrina with the bitter taste of truth. He had never needed to raise his voice, because some reckonings arrive like thunder, but the ones that last, they move like shadow. 3 weeks later, the courtroom smelled like old paper and quiet resentment. Caleb sat in the front row, hands folded, posture calm. He wore a dark suit, simple, unassuming, but his presence filled the room. Across from him sat Sabrina, eyes dulled, cheekbones sharper, her once effortless confidence now stiff and hollow. Jared wasn't there. His confession had made headlines, and his lawyers had buried him in settlements before the subpoenas could. This wasn't about Jared anymore. This was the final piece. Custody. The judge's voice echoed off the walls, reading from documents, citing behavioral patterns, parental stability, moral foundation. Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't even glance at Sabrina. He just watched the facts stack up in his favor, one after another. Texts, GPS logs, missed pickups from school, lies under oath. And finally, the gavel fell. Full custody of Leo Rowe is granted to Mr. Caleb Rowe. Visitation rights for Ms. Sabrina Rowe are suspended pending further review. It was done. Caleb stood slowly, nodded to the judge, and walked out without waiting for Sabrina to say a word. Outside, the sky was overcast. Rain hovered at the edges, uncertain. Leo waited on a bench, kicking his legs, clutching his backpack. "Hey, buddy," Caleb said, kneeling down. "Ready to go home?" Leo smiled. "Can we stop for pancakes?" Caleb nodded. "Of course we can." They walked toward the truck, father and son, hand in hand. Sabrina stepped out of the courthouse behind them, watching. She didn't speak, didn't call out, just stood there, her figure smaller than Caleb remembered. She had lost more than a marriage. She had lost the story she'd written for herself. Back, at home, Caleb tucked Leo into bed and stood at the doorway for a long moment, watching his son sleep. Peace. Something he hadn't felt in months. Downstairs, he opened his laptop one last time. A new message blinked in the encrypted account. He used to share evidence with the press. It was from a women's legal advocacy group he had quietly partnered with. Anonymous tips, whistleblower protections, strategic documentation. They had one line for him. More stories like hers. More lies like his. We're ready. Caleb stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. Because for the first time in a long time, his war was over. And what remained wasn't vengeance. It was purpose. Some betrayals don't scream, they whisper, they creep, they wear perfume and smile at dinner. And sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones carved by silence, not violence. Caleb Rowe didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he understood something most people overlook. The person who stays quiet isn't weak. They're preparing. In a world obsessed with explosive reaction, Caleb chose precision, observation, patience. And when the time came, he didn't just take back his life. He redefined the terms of truth. This story isn't about revenge, it's about consequence, about what happens when deception meets discipline, and what it really means to protect your peace. Now I'll leave you with a question that matters more than it seems. If you were Caleb, would you have let them walk away? Or would you have watched long enough to act at the perfect moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Be honest. There's no judgment here, just reflection. And if this story gripped you the way it gripped so many others, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because trust me, this isn't the last time someone like Caleb rewrites the ending.